During the inheritance meeting, my daughter looked me straight in the eye and said, "You want half the inheritance? You deserve to live with the stray dogs." Her words cut through the air like a blade. The room fell silent, heavy, suffocating silence. I closed my folder, stood up, and quietly walked out. No one stopped me. Not my son-in-law, adjusting his designer tie. Not the family lawyer, who suddenly found his papers fascinating. Not even my sister-in-law, who had always claimed to love me like family. Their silence said everything. As I looked at my daughter, my only child, I searched for any trace of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. But all I saw were cold, blue eyes, the same color she inherited from her father. I spoke calmly. "Nancy, I only want what your father and I agreed on. The house we built together and half of our savings, that's all." Matthew scoffed. "Be reasonable, Brenda. Nancy is Richard's daughter, his only child. The inheritance should stay in the bloodline." As if I were a stranger. Not the woman who spent 43 years beside Richard, not the one who worked 2 jobs to put Nancy through medical school, not the mother who sacrificed everything. I closed the folder, gathered what dignity I had left, and walked out. 16 floors down, the elevator mirrors showed a tired 65-year-old woman, silver-streaked hair, weary eyes, and shoulders bent from a lifetime of carrying everyone else's burdens. Outside, the autumn wind cooled the humiliation burning on my cheeks. I wandered aimlessly until I found a park bench and sat down, watching strangers hurry past, people with simple, ordinary lives. My phone buzzed. A text from Nancy. "Mom, sign the papers Patterson sends. Matthew already found a buyer for the house." No apology, no remorse, just business. A memory surfaced. Nancy at 17 calling me at work. "Mom, I wrecked the car. Dad's going to be furious." I had left work early, lost a day's pay, and paid for the repairs with the money I'd saved for a community college class I wanted to take. One sacrifice, among hundreds. Years of working nights so I could be home when she returned from school. Years of stretching every dollar to give her dance lessons, science camp, a better life. I took out the old photo from my wallet. Nancy in her graduation gown, standing proudly between Richard and me. "I couldn't have done it without you guys," she'd said, squeezing my hand. When did that love turn into greed? Was it Matthew's influence, his family's money, his disdain for people who actually worked? Or had it always been there, waiting to surface? I decided I'd give myself 3 days. 3 days to decide what to do next. 3 days to accept that my own daughter thought I belonged with stray dogs instead of being part of the life her father and I built together. As I stood up, people glanced my way, an old woman crying in public. How undignified. Richard would have hated that. Another message, Matthew this time. "Nancy's upset. Sign the papers, Brenda. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I turned off my phone and slipped it into my bag. Then I walked to the bus stop, mentally adding up what little savings I had in my personal account, the one Richard never knew about. It wasn't much, but maybe enough for a small apartment, enough to start over at 65. What Nancy and Matthew didn't know, what no one knew, was that I had a plan, a surprise that would change everything in exactly 3 days. I'd rented the apartment 6 months ago, right after Richard's diagnosis, when the tension with Nancy and Matthew had become too heavy to bear. Just for a little while, I'd told myself back then, until Richard gets better. But he never did. That night, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. The building was simple but clean, home to retirees and young people starting fresh. No one asked questions here. No one knew I was the Mrs. Harrington, widow of Richard Harrington, the man who built one of Ohio's most successful construction companies before selling it 5 years ago. The tea grew cold as I reached under my bed for a small weathered shoebox. Inside were pieces of a life Nancy knew nothing about. Photos, letters, old documents. Richard and I on our wedding day, both 22, full of dreams. I traced his face with my finger, remembering how charming he'd been, how sure of himself. Back then, I was working as a nurse, but after Nancy was born, Richard insisted I stop. "My wife doesn't need to work," he'd say proudly. No one ever saw how quickly that pride turned into control. I pulled out a photo from Nancy's 5th birthday, her smile wide, clutching the expensive doll Richard had bought her. What the picture didn't show was the argument the night before, or the bruise hidden under my sleeve. "You've always been good at hiding things, Brenda," I whispered to myself. The phone rang, breaking the silence. Nancy's name flashed across the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't just walk out of a meeting like that. It's embarrassing. Call me back before you make things worse." Make things worse? I almost laughed. What could possibly be worse than being told by your only child that you deserve to live with stray dogs? I put the phone down and took out another photo, Nancy on her wedding day 5 years ago. She looked radiant, glowing in white, but I remembered what the photo didn't show. Matthew's family taking over every detail, Richard happily going along, eager to impress his wealthy in-laws. My job had been to smile politely and write checks. After Nancy met Matthew during her final year of medical school, the changes came gradually: missed Sunday dinners, shorter calls. Then holidays spent with his family instead of ours. Each time she said it was for her career. "Connections," she'd say. By the time she married him, my thoughtful daughter had turned into someone who looked at me like an obligation instead of her mother. Richard never noticed, or maybe he didn't care. His focus was his company and his new impressive son-in-law. I took a sip of my cold tea, remembering the day that broke me. The day I found out Richard and Nancy had quietly changed the family finances behind my back. I'd stumbled across the papers. Trusts, property transfers, everything carefully arranged to cut me out. "It's just estate planning, Brenda," Richard had said, brushing me off. "You've never understood finances. Nancy and Matthew thought this would make things simpler." Simpler. For everyone but me. The apartment buzzer startled me. I hesitated, then pressed the intercom. "Brenda, it's Ellen from across the hall. Can I come up? I have something important to tell you." Ellen was my only friend in the building, a retired teacher with sharp eyes and a kind heart. I buzzed her in. When I opened the door, she didn't waste a second. "I saw you on the news," she said. "Just a glimpse, coming out of the Wentworth building downtown. That's where all the big lawyers are." My stomach turned. The local station had covered a charity event there earlier that day. I must have walked right through the frame. "You looked upset," Ellen said softly. "Is everything all right?" I hesitated, then gestured for her to sit. For 6 months, she'd never asked about my past. But now, I found myself answering. "My husband died 3 months ago," I said quietly. "Today was the reading of his will." Ellen waited. Her eyes were warm, patient. "He left almost everything to our daughter and her husband. When I questioned it, my daughter told me I should live with stray dogs rather than receive my share." Saying it out loud made it hurt all over again. "That's awful," Ellen whispered. "Why would she say such a thing?" I sighed. "Money changes people, or maybe it just shows who they really are." Ellen leaned forward. "And what are you going to do about it?" Her question caught me off guard. In 43 years of marriage, no one had ever asked me that. It was always about what Richard wanted, what Nancy needed, what would keep the peace. I took a breath. "I'm going to fight," I said, hearing the strength in my own voice. "Not just for the money, but for my dignity." Ellen nodded slowly, her expression firm. "Good," she said. "It's about time." "Good," Ellen said, her voice steady. "And how exactly will you do that?" For the first time that day, I smiled. "I already have a plan," I said quietly. "In 3 days, Nancy and Matthew are going to find out that Richard left them more than just money. He left them a time bomb, and I'm the only one who knows how to defuse it." Ellen raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Do tell." But I wasn't ready to share that secret. Not yet. "Let's just say," I replied, "my husband might have finally done something right, even if it was after he was gone." After Ellen left, I pulled the old shoebox closer and took out one last photo, Richard and Jack, his business partner, standing side by side at the groundbreaking of their first big project 30 years ago. Jack had seen everything. He'd seen how Richard treated me behind closed doors. He'd always been kind to me, quietly protective in ways that no one else noticed. 1 week before the will reading, Jack had slipped me a sealed envelope. "Only open it," he said, "if things go badly." Tomorrow, I decided, I would open it. Tomorrow I would start reclaiming what was mine. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains as I sat at the small kitchen table. The envelope lay before me. My hands trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter, Jack's neat penmanship, and a small USB drive. "Dear Brenda, if you're reading this, then the will reading went exactly as Richard and I feared. I tried to talk sense into him for years, but you know how stubborn he was. It wasn't until the very end that he realized how unfairly he'd treated you, and how much he'd let Nancy and Matthew influence him. One night, after you'd gone home from the hospital, he broke down. He admitted everything. He wanted to make things right, but he couldn't bring himself to say it out loud. The enclosed drive contains everything you'll need: financial records, property deeds, and, most importantly, evidence of what Matthew has been doing with company funds. Richard discovered it 2 weeks before he died, but was too weak to confront him. He asked me to give you this only if they tried to cut you out. Call me once you've reviewed everything. Your friend always, Jack." I sat frozen, emotions colliding. Anger, relief, disbelief. Anger that Richard had waited until his deathbed to show remorse, relief that someone had been on my side all along, and something else, a spark of anticipation. I powered up my old laptop and inserted the USB drive. The folders appeared one by one. The first contained property deeds, including one I'd never heard of, a lake house in Michigan, purchased secretly 3 years ago. The second folder showed bank statements, multiple accounts I didn't even know existed, all with substantial balances. Then there was the third folder, labeled simply, Matthew. I clicked it open. Dozens of files filled the screen: emails, bank transfers, transaction logs. As I read, my hand flew to my mouth. Matthew had been stealing from the company for years, funneling money into offshore accounts. There were records, messages, even a thread between him and someone named Vince, detailing how to hide it all from the old man. Richard had discovered everything and stayed silent, collecting proof. The last document stopped my breath, a notarized will dated 2 weeks before his death, naming me as the rightful owner of half the assets and appointing Jack, not Patterson, as executor. The phone rang, snapping me back to the present. Nancy's name flashed on the screen. "Mom, this is getting ridiculous," she began. "We need your signature today. The buyers for the house are getting impatient." "Buyers?" I asked evenly. "The Andersons. They've offered well above market value. Matthew says—" "I'm not signing anything today," I interrupted. My voice was calm, colder than even I expected. "Mom, don't be difficult," she snapped. "This is a great opportunity." "For whom?" I asked quietly. "For all of us. The sooner we finalize Dad's assets, the sooner we can move on." Move on. As if 43 years of marriage could be reduced to a quick transaction. "I'll need to review everything with my lawyer," I said. A pause. "Your lawyer? Since when do you have a lawyer?" "Since my daughter told me I deserve to live with stray dogs." Nancy let out an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, Mom. You're blowing that out of proportion." I was upset. "You know how stressful this is." "Yes," I said quietly. "I know stress. I know what it's like to lose my husband and then be told I don't deserve my fair share of what we built together." "Mom, I'll call you when I'm ready to discuss this further," I said firmly and hung up. My heart pounded. I had never spoken to Nancy like that before. In our family, keeping the peace always meant I was the one who bent, who apologized, who gave in. Not anymore. I dialed Jack. He answered on the first ring. "You've seen it all?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "Every single thing." I had no idea what Matthew was capable of. Jack's voice was calm but sharp. "Then it's time, Brenda. Time to finish what Richard started." The lake house, the accounts. Matthew? I asked. Jack's voice turned grim. Richard suspected Matthew was stealing long before he died, nearly a year. He even hired a private investigator to collect evidence. Then why didn't he confront him? I asked quietly. Why didn't he tell me? Pride, Jack said simply. He couldn't face the fact that he'd been so wrong about Matthew, and he was afraid of what it would do to Nancy. He always protected her, even from the consequences of her own mistakes. That part I understood all too well. It had been the story of my entire marriage. So what should I do now? Meet me at my office at 2, Jack said. Bring the drive. My lawyer will be there. He hesitated. Brenda, you should also know this. Matthew's in trouble, far beyond the embezzlement. Those investments he made with Richard's money, they're collapsing. Word is, he's desperate for cash. Suddenly, everything made sense. The rush to sell the house wasn't just greed, it was panic. I spent the next hour copying every file from the USB drive, then got dressed carefully. My best navy pantsuit, the one I'd bought years ago for job interviews back when Richard first got sick, before Nancy and Matthew convinced me that I wasn't needed at the company anymore. As I locked my apartment door, Ellen stepped into the hallway. You look different today, she said, studying me. More formidable. I smiled. I feel different. Did you open that envelope? I did, I said softly. Her eyes twinkled. And? I learned that even after 43 years of marriage, my husband could still surprise me. I glanced at my watch. I'm sorry, Ellen. I have to go. Meeting a lawyer. She squeezed my arm. Go get them, Brenda. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Nancy. Matthew's talking to Patterson about having you declared incompetent to make financial decisions. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. A threat. Clear and cruel. 6 months ago, it would have shattered me. Today, it only made me stronger. They had no idea what was coming. Jack's office was another world. Polished wood, glass walls, sunlight spilling over the skyline. So different from the tiny construction trailer where he and Richard had started the business 40 years earlier. I still remembered bringing them sandwiches back then, helping with invoices when the company was nothing but a dream. Brenda. Jack stood, smiling warmly. He looked older than his 67 years. Grief had carved new lines into his face. He'd lost his best friend. I'd lost my husband, a man who had been both my protector and my jailer. This is Diane Levinson, Jack said, introducing a sharp-eyed woman in a tailored suit. Best attorney in the state, and the toughest negotiator I know. Diane shook my hand firmly. Mrs. Harrington, I've reviewed the documents Jack sent. You have a very strong position. For the next hour, we discussed strategy. The revised will, properly signed and notarized, legally replaced the one Patterson had presented. The evidence against Matthew was airtight, and with Jack as the new executor, we could freeze all assets immediately, stopping Nancy and Matthew's plans to liquidate anything. What about their threat? I asked. The claim that I'm incompetent? Diane smiled coolly. Let them try. I'd love to hear them explain to a judge why a woman who managed her family's finances for decades suddenly became incompetent the moment they wanted to sell everything she owns. My phone buzzed again and again during the meeting, calls from Nancy, from Matthew, even from Patterson. I ignored them all. When our discussion ended, Diane gave me a firm look. Prepare yourself, Mrs. Harrington. Once we file, things will get ugly. They won't give up easily. I've lived with ugly for a long time, I replied. At least now it will be out in the open. Jack walked me to my car. Richard really did love you, Brenda, he said softly. In his own broken way. This was his attempt to make things right. I nodded, my throat tight. What can you say about a man who hurt you for decades, and then tried to protect you from beyond the grave? When I pulled into my building, my heart sank. A sleek black Mercedes waited by the curb, Matthew's car. He and Nancy were standing outside my door, perfectly dressed, completely out of place in my quiet hallway. Finally, Nancy said, arms crossed. "We've been waiting for over an hour." I unlocked the door without answering and walked in. They followed, uninvited. Nancy's eyes swept over my small apartment, her expression full of disdain. "So, this is where you've been living," she said. "Why didn't you stay at the house?" "Would you have wanted me there?" I asked calmly. "Of course," she said automatically, but her eyes darted away. Matthew stepped forward, all business. "Let's be practical, Brenda. The Andersons won't wait forever. We need to finalize this, and there are other urgent matters." "What matters?" I asked evenly. "Estate taxes, investments, property management?" He waved a hand dismissively. "Details you don't need to concern yourself with." "Because I'm just a silly old woman who doesn't understand finances?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Matthew gave me a patronizing smile. "We're simply trying to make this easier for everyone. Grief can cloud judgment, and Nancy and I are better equipped to handle these complex decisions." I looked from him to Nancy, her face pale, her jaw tight. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of either of them. "Like you handled the company funds?" I asked quietly. The color drained from Matthew's face. "What?" "The company funds you've been stealing for years," I said evenly. "The offshore accounts, the failed investments, the lies." Nancy's head snapped toward me, her expression bewildered. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Matthew recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. "This is absurd. You're clearly not thinking straight." But I turned to my laptop, opened it, and spun the screen toward them. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain this," I said. On the display was one of the emails between Matthew and his so-called business partner discussing how to hide transactions from Richard. "Richard found out everything before he died," I continued. "He just didn't live long enough to confront you." Nancy leaned forward, scanning the screen, her confusion fading into shock. "Matthew, what is this?" His mask cracked. "It's nothing. Just business taken out of context. Your mother doesn't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, "and so did your father. That's why he changed his will 2 weeks before he died." I handed Nancy a copy of the revised will. Her hands trembled as she read it. "This can't be legal," she whispered. "It's completely legal," I replied. "Properly signed, witnessed, and notarized. Jack is the executor now, not Patterson, and half of everything belongs to me." Matthew lunged for the papers, but Nancy pulled back, still reading her face turning pale. "Dad left you the lake house," she murmured. "I didn't even know we had a lake house." "There's a lot you don't know," I said gently. "Things Richard kept from both of us." Matthew began pacing the small room like a trapped animal. "This is a setup," he snapped. "Jack's always hated me. He planted this evidence." "The evidence came from Richard himself," I said calmly, "and it's already with the district attorney's office." He froze. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I met his eyes steadily. Nancy sank onto my sofa, the will clutched in her shaking hands. "Matthew," she said, her voice trembling, "just tell me it isn't true." His silence said everything. "Get out," I said quietly. "Nancy and I need to talk." "Nancy comes with me," he barked, grabbing her arm. She tore herself free. "Don't touch me. I need to understand what's happening." For a second, the fury in his face twisted into something ugly. "You stupid, ungrateful—" He caught himself, breathing hard. "Fine, talk to your mother, but remember who gave you the life you have while she was playing nurse." He slammed the door behind him, leaving the apartment in ringing silence. Nancy stared at the papers in her lap. "Is it true? All of it?" "Yes," I said softly. "And your father knew before he died. He left the evidence with Jack, with instructions to give it to me only if you and Matthew tried to cut me out." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't know, Mom, about the money, the accounts, any of it." "I believe you," I said, and I meant it. Nancy had changed, yes, but she wasn't capable of that level of deceit. She looked down, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me how bad things were with Dad? Why you stayed?" I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of every year behind me. "I wanted to protect you," I said, "and I was ashamed. Admitting how he treated me meant admitting that I let it happen. Nancy's tears spilled over. And now I've become just like him, haven't I? Treating you like you don't matter. Her voice cracked. Mom, what I said at the lawyer's office, the apology I'd waited for hung between us, fragile but real. We have a lot to talk about, I said quietly. But first, we have to deal with Matthew. He won't walk away quietly, not now. Nancy straightened, wiping her tears. For the first time in years, she looked to me for guidance. What do we do? For now, I said, picking up my phone, we call Jack, and then we prepare for battle. The next 48 hours blurred together, meetings with lawyers, long calls with investigators, endless signatures and filings. Diane moved like lightning, freezing accounts, securing assets, and submitting Richard's updated will for validation. Matthew vanished. His clothes were gone, his personal accounts emptied. Nancy moved back into the family home, my home, according to the new documents. When a full day passed without a word from her, I drove there myself. Unlocking that door after 6 months felt surreal. Everything looked just as I'd left it. The old grandfather clock ticking softly, the polished furniture Richard had insisted on buying to impress clients, the photographs lining the mantel. "Nancy?" I called, my voice echoing down the hall. I found her in Richard's study, surrounded by open boxes and scattered papers. Her hair was pulled back loosely, her eyes were red-rimmed from crying. "I've been going through Dad's things," she said quietly, without looking up, trying to understand who he really was, who any of us were. I sat in the leather chair across from her, watching her sift through decades of our lives, birth certificates, insurance forms, old photos, contracts. Then she looked up and pushed a small stack of envelopes toward me. "I found these," she said. "They were hidden in the bottom drawer of his desk." "They were hidden in a secret compartment," Nancy said softly, setting the stack of envelopes on the desk. I recognized my handwriting immediately, letters I had written to Richard during our courtship, full of hope, dreams, and love. Letters I thought he had thrown away decades ago. "He kept them all," Nancy whispered. "Every single one." My hands trembled as I touched the faded paper. I didn't think he cared that much. "There's more," she said hesitantly, then handed me a leather-bound journal. His private diary. I probably shouldn't have read it, but... She trailed off, helplessly. I opened it to a page marked by a worn ribbon. Richard's bold handwriting filled the lines. March 15th, 2016. "The doctors say it's cancer, stage 4, maybe a year left, probably less. Haven't told Brenda or Nancy yet. Need time to put things in order. Looking back on my life, I've built something successful, a business, a home, financial stability. But at what cost? Brenda deserved better than the man I became. So focused on winning that, I forgot what mattered. Jack was right. I treated her like an employee, not a partner. I let Nancy and Matthew push her aside because it was easier than standing up to them. I've been a coward in ways no one would ever believe. I turned the page, my breath catching. April 3rd, 2016. Told Brenda about the diagnosis today. No tears, just that quiet strength she's always had. She said she'd be with me every step of the way. After everything I've done, she still stands by me. I don't deserve her loyalty. Matthew came by later, already talking about selling assets. Something feels wrong about his eagerness. Need to watch him carefully. Nancy's voice broke my concentration. "Keep reading." I turned several more pages, entries about Richard's growing suspicions, his unease, his frustration. And then, one final entry stopped me cold. May 20th, 2016. Confirmed today what I've suspected for months. Matthew's been stealing from the company, millions over the last 3 years. He's made reckless investments and lost most of it. Worse, he's convinced Nancy that I'm losing my mind, that my suspicions are just the cancer affecting my judgment. My own daughter thinks I'm delusional, not realizing her husband is a thief. Jack's the only one I trust now. We've documented everything. I've changed my will to protect Brenda. Though I know she'll share with Nancy once the truth comes out, Brenda always forgives too easily. It's her greatest strength and her greatest weakness. I closed the journal, my vision blurring. "Did you read the last entries?" I asked quietly. Nancy nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. He knew he was dying. He knew what Matthew was doing, and he knew I'd chosen the wrong side. "You didn't know," I said softly. "I should have." Her voice cracked. "I'm a doctor. I should have noticed." But I was so wrapped up in the life Matthew promised, the money, the connections, the image, that I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. She looked up at me, face crumpling. "And I treated you just like Dad did, like you didn't matter." The pain in her eyes was real. Still, I wasn't ready to erase the past so easily. "Yes," I said gently, "you did. And you asked why I never fought back. Against him, against you. The truth is, I grew up believing peace was more important than truth, that loving someone meant accepting whatever they gave you, even if it hurt." I ran my hand over the journal's cover, but I was wrong too. By staying silent, I taught you that it was okay to treat me that way. I let both of you believe I was small. Nancy wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Can you ever forgive me?" "I already have," I said honestly. "But forgiveness doesn't erase what needs to change. For both of us." She nodded, swallowing hard. "I filed for divorce this morning. I don't know where Matthew is, but his lawyer called. He's demanding half of everything." I couldn't help but laugh softly. "Just like I did." A small smile flickered across her face. "Except you actually earned it." For a moment we sat in silence, surrounded by fragments of Richard's life, the confessions he'd hidden, and the pieces of ourselves we were just beginning to rebuild. "I spoke with Diane," Nancy said finally, "about the evidence against Matthew. She says there's enough for criminal charges." I nodded. "Jack mentioned that too. Do you want to pursue it?" "It would mean reporters, a public trial, people knowing everything." The old Brenda, the one who stayed quiet, who avoided scandal at any cost, would have said no. But that Brenda was gone. "The truth needs to come out," I said softly. "Not for revenge, but because the secrets in this family have already done enough damage." Nancy reached across the desk and took my hand. "Then we'll face it together," she said. "Whatever comes next." It was the first time in years my daughter had touched me with love, and the first time I truly believed we could both start again. Her hand felt small in mine, the same hand that once clung to me in the dark, begging me to check under the bed for monsters. Now we were facing real monsters together, the ones born from decades of secrets and silence. "There's something else," Nancy said softly, pulling a folder from the stack on Richard's desk. "Dad's real lawyer, not Patterson, contacted me yesterday. He said Dad set up a foundation in your name." She handed me the folder. "The Brenda Harrington Foundation for Women's Education." Inside were detailed plans for a scholarship program designed for women returning to school after raising families or caring for loved ones. "He knew," I whispered, my voice trembling. "He knew I always regretted not finishing my degree after we married." "It's his legacy to you," Nancy said gently. "Maybe his way of saying he finally understood what you sacrificed." As I turned through the documents, something inside me shifted. The weight I'd carried for years, the silence, the self-blame, the endless need to keep the peace, began to lift. For the first time in decades, I could imagine a future shaped by my own choices. A life not defined by Richard's ambitions or Nancy's expectations, but by my voice. Outside the study window, sunlight broke through the clouds, washing the garden in gold. Richard's garden, now my garden. Mine to tend, to change, or to let go of completely. The choice, finally, was mine. 1 year later, I stood at a podium in the community college auditorium, looking out at 20 women, the first recipients of the Brenda Harrington Foundation scholarships. Their faces reflected everything I felt in my heart: hope, courage, and the quiet pride of being truly seen. "Each of you has a story," I began, my voice steady, strong. "You've spent years putting others first. Today marks your turn, your time to choose your dreams, your education, your future." Applause rippled through the room. In the front row, Ellen gave me a thumbs up. Beside her sat Jack, now a trusted friend and board member. And at the back of the room, clipboard in hand, stood Nancy, organizing, managing, helping. So much had changed in a year. Matthew had been found in Mexico, trying to start a new life with what was left of the stolen money. Legal proceedings were still underway, but he'd already agreed to a major settlement in the divorce, desperate for leniency. Nancy had returned to medicine, this time focusing on geriatric care, working with people society often forgets, the same way our family once forgot me. As for me, I'd shocked everyone, including myself, by enrolling in college. At 66, I was finally pursuing the business degree I'd given up when I married Richard. My professors often asked me to speak to younger students, to share how I'd gone from a silenced wife to the director of a foundation helping women rebuild their lives. The foundation had become my calling. With Jack and our advisory board, we'd expanded its mission, adding mentorship, career counseling, and workshops on financial independence for women of all ages. After the ceremony, Nancy approached me, her usual professional composure softened by emotion. "That was a beautiful speech, Mom," she said quietly. "Those women really connected with what you said." "I just told them the truth," I replied, gathering my notes. "That it's never too late to reclaim your voice." Nancy nodded slowly. "I've been thinking a lot about that lately, about voices and silence." She hesitated. "I found more of Dad's journals, older ones, from when I was little." My heartbeat quickened. "He wrote about the fights," she said softly, "about the control, the money, the decisions he made without you. He even wrote about hitting you once when I was 5. I closed my eyes, the memory surfacing, the new dress I'd bought without asking, his anger, the look in his eyes. I'd buried that moment so deeply I'd almost convinced myself it hadn't happened. "I had no idea," Nancy whispered, her voice breaking. "All those years I thought we were perfect. I thought Dad was this strong, successful man, and you were just quiet, unambitious." I reached for her arm gently. "You were a child," I said. "I wanted to protect you from knowing those things." She shook her head. "But don't you see? By protecting me, you let me believe a lie. You let me idolize a man who hurt you, and I became just like him." The pain in her eyes was raw, honest. We'd had so many hard talks over the past year, but this one felt different, deeper, real. "I've been seeing a therapist," Nancy confessed, "trying to understand how I became someone who could say such cruel things to her own mother, who could tell you that you deserve to live with stray dogs." I winced. The words still cut, even after all this time. But as I looked at my daughter, the same girl who once needed me to check under the bed for monsters, I realized something. She wasn't the monster. None of us were. We had just been living in the dark for too long. Narration outro for YouTube. Sometimes healing doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from finally telling the truth. Richard left behind money, property, and regrets. But he also left behind a chance for me, for Nancy, to finally break the silence. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. It's never too late to reclaim your voice and to build a life that truly belongs to you. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Nancy said quietly. "I just want you to know I'm trying to be better, to unlearn the patterns Dad created and that I kept alive." I studied her face, the determined set of her jaw, so much like Richard's, but the tenderness in her eyes was entirely her own. "We're both learning," I said softly. "Me, to speak up. You, to listen. It's progress." Jack appeared in the doorway, breaking the moment. "Sorry to interrupt," he said. "The caterers need to know where to set up for the reception." Nancy checked her watch. "I'll handle it. The donors will be here soon." She squeezed my hand before hurrying off. Jack watched her go, then turned to me with a small smile. "Everything okay?" "Getting there," I replied. "One conversation at a time." He nodded, understanding. "Richard would be proud of what you've built with the foundation." "Maybe," I said thoughtfully, "but I didn't do it for him. I did it for me, and for women like me." Jack's smile deepened. "That's exactly why it's working." He hesitated, uncharacteristically nervous. "I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with me next week. Not about business, just dinner." I felt a flutter of surprise, followed by something warm and unexpected. Jack had been Richard's friend for decades, but this past year he'd become something else to me. A confidant, a supporter, a man who saw me for who I truly was. "I'd like that," I said simply. That evening, after the reception ended and the last guests drifted away, I returned to my new home, a modest condo overlooking the park, bought with my share of the inheritance. It wasn't grand like the house Richard and I once shared, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture chosen by me, every photo, every color, every space arranged for comfort, not appearance. On the wall hung a framed quote Ellen had given me as a housewarming gift. "The quietest voice, when finally raised, can shake mountains." I traced the words with my fingertips, remembering the journey of the past year, from humiliation in a lawyer's office to standing before hundreds as a woman reborn. The road hadn't been easy. There were court hearings, painful truths, and moments when reconciliation seemed impossible. But there were also discoveries, of strength I didn't know I had, of friends who stood beside me, and of a daughter who finally chose honesty over pride. And most of all, there was the rediscovery of a voice that had never truly been lost, only waiting to be heard. I poured a glass of wine and stepped onto the balcony. The evening air was soft and warm, filled with laughter from the park below, families walking hand in hand, couples talking quietly on benches, students tossing frisbees in the fading light. My phone buzzed, a message from Nancy. "Just wanted to say I'm proud of you, Mom. See you Sunday for dinner." I smiled, typing my reply, already looking forward to it. Setting my phone aside, I gazed out at the skyline. In the distance, I could see the illuminated sign of the community college, the same place where, that morning, I'd watched 20 women accept scholarships from the foundation that bore my name. At 66, I was finally the author of my own story. The legacy I would leave wasn't just written in legal documents or property deeds. It was in the lives of women who would rise because I had dared to. Richard's final gift hadn't been the foundation, or even the money. It was the push I needed to realize that I had always been capable of standing on my own. I raised my glass in a quiet toast to the woman I had become, and to the women who would come after me. Women who would learn far earlier than I did that their voices matter, that their worth isn't measured by anyone else's approval, because the inheritance that truly mattered wasn't money. It was dignity. It was peace. It was the power of being heard.